The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
And this is episode 211 of the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for being here with me. I am the King of Podcasts. You ask yourself, why am I calling myself that? I actually made that point on TikTok this week because somebody put a stitch out or requested for those out there to stitch the reason for their username. Well, it'll be December 18th, later this year, that it will be 10 years ago that I coined myself the King of Podcasts. And I picked up the domain name, I picked up the Twitter handle, I picked up every other social media handle I could. And speaking of social media, the piling on of social media is really what we're going to talk about to start things off here because of all the things that are going on with, various things that are going on with criticisms, canceling, and censorship. There's that initial part to talk about because we have three names to go and talk about, celebrities that made comments, and for whatever reason, we'll bring all that up. So there's Peter Dinklage, Tyrion Lannister of Game of Thrones fame, and also is going to be featured in the new movie Cyrano. Neil Young, the Hall of Fame rock and roller, and radio's king of all media, shock jock, Howard Stern. Well, no longer shock jock, but we understand. Sirius XM host Howard Stern. They all had comments being made, and there's a lot that's being talked about. So the main story that came up that really got people really talked up was the out of context commentary and the piling on social media about Peter Dinklage and his comments about a new live action Snow White. So here's what he says. And, when I heard about it and people were talking about it and they took one of his comments out of context, I was like, what? And I wanted to go and find out for myself. So we had to wait until we could hear more of what was going on. The Hollywood Reporter actually put a nice story out about it. So let's talk about this. Peter Dinklage was on Mark Maron's WTF podcast, and he talked about the upcoming live-action remake of Snow White, which we're not saying, yes. We know the original story is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which now today would be a story that would offend some people out there. And this is what was being said. Now, first of all, they were talking about the casting of West Side Story, which if you want to know my comments about that and the issues about how that movie performed so badly in the box office, it's not so much because of the casting and the stereotyping and the things they did with the movie. It's just that a 1961 movie that was, I think it was Academy Award winner, right? Or at least nominated. It was so well done. Not my cup of tea, but I can understand why people liked it. The movie was so heralded. Was there a reason to remake it? And that was the question that some people need to ask Steven Spielberg why he wanted to remake it. Not that he couldn't, but why? What for? But they decided to go ahead and create it for a new generation, and they decided to go ahead and do some things where they tinkered with who was being cast in the roles. And, there might have been a little bit of something about, the representation of those that were in the movie, that were cast in the movie. Also, the other issues with one of the cast members being being accused sex offender. Let's just say it like that. So here's what Dinklage told Maron about the casting of West Side Story breakout star Rachel Zegler. Dinklage told Maron, quote, literally no offense to anyone, but I was a little taken aback when they were proud to cast a Latina actress as Snow White. But you're still telling the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Take a step back at what you're doing there. And this is, when I got the full context of what Peter Dinklage said, I'm like, got it. Okay. Take a step back, he says, and look at what you're doing there. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but then you're still making that fucking backward story about seven dwarfs living in a cave together. What the fuck are you doing, man? I have done nothing to advance the cause for my soapbox. I guess I'm not loud enough. Dinklage, funny and correct. Because this performative allyship, this idea that Well, we have to have representation just because we have to have representation. Instead of being a natural representation. The movie, if you're going to recast it, just call it something else. You want to adapt it? You want to interpolate? That's the nice popular musical word. If you want to do that and just, create another version, why go ahead and just remake? It's the same thing why Cinderella has been made 4 times with completely different characters. You can do it, but, it's like, why? Again, that simple question. Now, moving along, Disney tried to set the record straight following the remarks made by Peter Dinklage, and they said this, quote, "To avoid reinforcing stereotypes from the original animated film, we are taking a different approach with these 7 characters and have been consulting with members of the dwarfism community." Is that the word we're using? I don't know. Is that the word we're using? Dwarfism? Oh, boy. And this is where Disney's trying to, play to the progressive sense. And even in the statement, trying to avoid any conflict. Trying to be safe. Trying to coddle their audience that they think they're going to be able to get for this movie. This is a movie that's going to probably be set to kids. Are they going to care about this story unless it's being brought up by their parents? Those are the people that would be contentious about it. They said that we look forward to sharing more as the film heads into production after a lengthy development period. Still years from release, Snow White will have cultural consultants, just like live-action films such as Aladdin and Mulan. The film has been in development for 3 years. The studio is reimagining the dwarf characters since the earliest stages, intended for the characters to be CG animated. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's still funny that we have this story and this is what we have to talk about, but it comes down to, if you have movies that are stereotypes, there is nothing wrong with you reinterpreting the story. You do not have to do word for word Snow White. And there's no judging the fact of, and I don't think anybody's really, and this is the point, he's not questioning the fact of Rachel Zegler being Snow White. Not a problem there. She's a beautiful actress. She's accomplished. She can perform well. Okay. I mean, it's the same thing as if you had Brandy or Camila Cabello play Cinderella. Yeah. Okay. That's the performance they're going to make. They wanted to do what they're going to do. Fine. And this is nothing new. I mean, to be shocked or, mortified over the fact that, another show or another movie is just being interpreted, they just can't leave well enough alone. Well, then make it something else. I mean, maybe the part of Snow White, you don't include the dwarfs. That's what you don't include. But we don't, this is what they have as their thought process for whatever reason. And this was an issue that was being brought up. And I was like, this is really not much to really bring up here. Not much to be said. But the other thing, too, is that, I try to ask myself at first, when I started reading about this particular story, I'm saying to myself, well, is this something to do with like the fact that he has a new movie coming out? Would that be anything to do with it? And it's not. But, they decided to go ahead and did it. But here's the thing, too. Is the coverage of this and the fact of how it's being responded to. Because you're looking at the stories right now. NPR reports says Peter Dinklage slams Disney over the Snow White remake. The thing is, the media decided to go ahead and perpetrate this, throwdown. No. Stop with this incendiary language. It was not like that. He thought it was ridiculously stupid to go and do a backwards movie like this. Why are we doing that movie again with all the blatant stereotypes that would offend people? And it would offend people. He's not wrong about that. So you have Peter Dinklage make his comments, but then it's the way the media decides to go and take it. And then you know what social media does? They pile on. They're just like, right? And that's what they do. So in the story, I want to take one, that's from NPR, where they talk about this story again, and they make their point. And I would tell you, if the story on NPR.org would actually load, but for whatever reason, did they take the story down? Is there something going on where I can't get it? Oh, here we go. So in June 2021, the comments were made that the studio announced that Rachel Zegler would be the titular character in this forthcoming remake. Now, it sounds interesting. Because in the live action version, it'll be directed by Mark Webb, best known for directing the Spider-Man movies starring Andrew Garfield. Gal Gadot will be the evil queen. And production would start this year. And Dinklage stressed that he meant literally no offense to anyone and sent all love and respect to the actress and to the people who thought they were doing the right thing. But his frustration was palpable. By the way, they put this at the end of the story. Right? Disney on the defensive after Peter Dinklage criticized its plans to release a live-action remake. He's throwing him down. He's slamming him. No, he's not. He has a palpable. Oh, so it's a understood, criticism. We could swallow it. We could justify it, but we don't believe it. That's what they want to try to say. And he said this, which is, I'm looking at another story outside of Hollywood Reporter. He added that he would enthusiastically support a more sensitive retelling of the 85-year-old film with a cool progressive spin on it, but otherwise wasn't convinced. Yeah. Why do we actually have to go and remake the movie? You know what? I would have more respect for Hollywood if they decided not just to go ahead and blatantly remake movies. If you're just going to make another movie, okay, look. What's the movie that's coming out with Channing Tatum and Sandra Bullock? I want to go look for that when that movie is coming up. Not Dog. There's another movie that's coming out, and this is the one that, The Lost City. Okay, The Lost City, no doubt about it to me, feels like a copy of Romancing the Stone. And I bet you if I put anything in here at all, yes, look at that. Even I said, they talk about the movie itself, and they make mention, is it based on Romancing the Stone? And here's the thing. The Lost City, they even said that it is said to be in the vein of Robert Zemeckis' classic Romancing the Stone. And they just decided to do that. Now, they didn't do any progressive spin to it, but I don't have a problem with the progressive spin. Do we have to just keep remaking and rehashing something just because? Because it has to have that name, because of the sensibility of that. Just make a good movie. Look, if you made a movie like this, which was similar to Snow White, and you created a similar story, and you told us that Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot is going to be starring in it, you show the story, you show the trailer in the theaters, you show the trailer on wherever you watch, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and people notice the movie, like, yeah, the buzz then begins. This is Snow White, isn't it? They're just retelling Snow White. So I'm okay with that. And I'm also okay with the fact that they don't call it Snow White. But Disney can't help themselves. They're just going to go and do it again. No. How about building under the legacy? Why do we have to live off the legacy of an 85-year film? This is what Disney wants to do. They want to go ahead and repurpose make live action movies out of some of their classic animated films. But if you're not going to do more or less a shot-by-shot remake, live action, then don't even bother. Just change the name of the movie. You could do something else. For the actresses and actresses and the people in the staff, do you like the fact you're just recreating the same story, that you have no creativity to it? Maybe some of these people out here that want to have a proper representation, a different makeup of the movie, they want to retell the story from a different set. Okay, the best example. The Wizard of Oz and The Wiz. This is an easy example, ladies and gentlemen. The Wiz is exactly the same thing. You look at that movie, 1978. Now, it didn't make as much money, right? Budget was $24 million. Box office made $21 million. But it's an iconic movie. There's a whole lot behind that movie, and it was an all-black cast. And you know what? You can't knock what they did. What they created was something special. They made it a movie that is iconic. And people will still talk about it today because they know about Michael Jackson's role in the movie The Scarecrow. And they talk about it and everything going on behind it. And Diana Ross as Dorothy. That was the earliest sense of a movie retold. Hey, we don't want a Wizard of Oz we're not going to do the one they did before. And by the way, if I look at that movie, let's remember, did they have munchkins? No. Do you realize that? They didn't include munchkins in the movie. But they still told the story in the same vein as it was in The Wizard of Oz, which is what you could have done here. Not a problem. You could have done the same thing. It's not that hard. Hollywood's done this before. And that's the other thing. This is not like it's anything new. That movie was 78. That's 44 years ago. And I'm sure there's other movies I could think of that did the same thing. It would be better off, and you're not going to insult anybody's intelligence by changing around the movie because you just decided to go ahead and, just like this, the director for The Lost City, it's being done in the same vein. Yeah. And that's okay too. I don't think it should matter what the name of the movie is and what they're putting into it. But that's just what they decided to do. So anyway, I like where Peter Dinklage was saying. He's absolutely right about it. And so good on him. Totally agree. And for me, I'm not a Disney fan. I don't watch all these Disney movies, but I can appreciate what they're going to do. Listen, if they want to do the Snow White story, I think it would be great if they go ahead and just decide to retell, but they decide not to go and just go ahead and stay close to the original image, because we already know Bambi or Dumbo or, pick other movies that they've done that had some connotations that they don't translate well 80 years later. And that's what you do. It's like, you're not going to recreate Birth of a Nation and you think you're going to make a movie that's going to be like the exact same, shot for shot in 2022. That's not going to happen, okay? There's just things you just don't do. And you didn't have to go and do this, but maybe they will decide, okay, they're going to do Snow White because they want to do Snow White. They're set on it. That's what they want to do. All right, fine. Another story, of course, I have to bring up, and this is where you can't help themselves, is Howard Stern. And so he decided to make comments, and this is where, first of all, we have to go to the other part, is the part about Joe Rogan and Neil Young. Now, I do not care to talk about the issue of, there was a time where I might have talked about Joe Rogan, but we know that it's such a political thing right now that I just don't care to talk about. But there's really some responses that go on here that really say a lot. Now, so in this particular story, the latest that we have right now, because Joe Rogan has his show on Spotify, which is this big leading streaming service platform for audio, and Neil Young's music, of which he does not own anymore because he sold it for $150 million in his entire catalog, he decided to leave the streaming service because it gives a platform to Joe Rogan. This is taking the story from the New York Times, whom scientists have accused of promoting falsehoods about coronavirus vaccines. Look, I don't even want to touch what Joe Rogan said about any of that. It doesn't matter. But he has the platform, he has a contract with Spotify, and Spotify is going to decide to stand behind somebody that they're spending $100 million on. And for me, I'm a person that is, if there's the line that has to be crossed, if it's anything criminal. Yeah, anything criminal, honestly, that's the line that can't be crossed. That goes for anybody. I mean, I've always talked about free speech, but you know what? You can't talk about that much these days because it is really tough to talk about that now. Social media, if you try to bring up free speech and being an advocate on social media, you're just going to get shot down. You're going to get destroyed. But that's just because, as I've talked about, there is a coddling of people out there that, they can be easily offended because they were raised entitled. They were raised to be, that they had to be protected in a safety bubble. Now, it's the same people that have listened to the media and they've heard about the coronavirus vaccines, which, by the way, I have mine. And the whole idea is that for everybody that keeps getting told that, the vaccines would protect you so you'll never get the infected, is wrong. You're going to get infected. And that's okay. But if you're vaccinated, you have a better chance of fighting it off once you get infected. It's like chickenpox. It's like polio. It's like everything else. All the other things that you get vaccinated for when you're a child, or when you get vaccinated when you go overseas. Which is, when I think about it, I understand what Howard Stern says when he talks about that. Because he's had his own spats with Joe Rogan, which we talked about on the show as well. Not too long ago. Late last year. So anytime Joe Rogan's in the news and there's some kind of criticism, Howard Stern can't help himself but jumping into conversation, because he's going to. It's his show. So anyway, the story right now is that Neil Young made his comedy and said, listen, it's either me or Joe Rogan. Whatever reason, Neil Young thought he still had enough clout, probably about 30 years past his real, that was still part of a legacy of popularity, from the Crazy Horse to all his work he's done from the 60s, 70s, 80s. Listen, I have no issues when it comes to his music. He's talented. He's a Hall of Famer. He deserves it. He's got great music, period. And him deciding to go ahead and push his weight, thinking he's going to get Joe Rogan pushed off of Spotify, doesn't make any sense. I mean, now it's just where, I don't know if it's just kind of a publicity stunt for him, or if he just feels like he needs to go ahead and be out there because, he feels the plight of the younger people out there, which he's always done. That he feels like he wants to leave this world a certain way, and he's probably always had that thought process about, various different issues. So when it comes to, what we learned from the pandemic and the coronavirus, he probably has some thoughts about it. Or maybe this, which is in line with most Hollywood actors and actresses, whether they believe it or not. But there's a certain narrative that you have to have, and he feels like he could do something where he can go ahead and go after Joe Rogan and his popular show. And now the fact is, with Howard Stern, at one point it would have been punching down for him to go after Joe Rogan, but now it's Joe Rogan. Now he's punching up, because Howard Stern doesn't have the audience that Joe Rogan has now. But Joe Rogan is taking a place of the popularity scale as to what Howard Stern was. But Howard Stern, it paved the way for a Joe Rogan. Let's just put it like that. That is absolutely clear. No question there. And the one thing is that, Joe Rogan's going to go and die on the vine believing what he's going to believe. Howard Stern doesn't, because he changed. He decided to apologize. He decided to go ahead and pull back on everything he did in his career. He regrets it now. And now he wants a mea culpa for everything he did. I bet you he can't even watch this movie Private Parts now without just feeling triggered. Because now he just feels like, whatever therapy has done and he's talked about, the abandoning and the constant destroying of relationships that he's had for a long time with various people in media or people that were entertainers, what he's done, and then deciding to go ahead and remend fences with various stars that he had large size feuds with, and he just feels guilty as anything, to the fact that, all right, I gotta say this too, because Howard Stern now doesn't have the bite he used to back in the day, to when he was being attacked, because he's doing the attacking now. But if the shoe was on the other foot, he would have come back, he would have roiled on people, which he would have done. Now, not anymore. Now when you have the likes of a Tucker Carlson on Fox News able to go ahead and start throwing down at you, that's sad. That's sad. That Howard Stern is now, he's gotten soft. There's a lot of audience that has abandoned him because those that would have listened in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, up to when he went to Sirius. And then for a while when he got on the Sirius. But remember, when he got on the Sirius, that rebellion spirit of his went away. A lot of things happened well for him in Sirius. Hey, Mel Karmazin did him a great service by bringing him over to Sirius XM and making him the pillar of that satellite radio network. Huge contract. Bigger than money that he could ever seen. He meets Beth, and then Everything that could have gone well does. And he's living it up. He's a near billionaire. He has everything he could want in terms of wealth, status, everything. And now the Howard Stern of the 80s and 90s would throw up at what he has become now. But that's because he feels like there's a reckoning, that he has to have a mea culpa, that he had to go and change his ways. He has to apologize. And as far as I know, radio doesn't like apologists. We don't, in talk radio, and for what we like, and for my own case, I don't like apologists. You just turn your back on everything. And Neil Young, this is nothing new. It is what it is. Some stars now, they're made to do this. They're made to go ahead and, as they grow up, there's more control over what their career is or what they've done and what they've had, and how there are still powers to be that still control their careers that could take everything away. Deal with the devil, as they always say. Which is why I wouldn't be surprised what they have with these two here. So Spotify said it began removing the singer's music from the streaming service. And this was after Neil Young posted a public letter calling on Spotify to choose between him and Joe Rogan. Young's challenge to Spotify became a high-profile and unexpected flashpoint. Yeah, it got escalated. The media couldn't help themselves. Any chance to go and pile on Joe Rogan, they're going to do, because he's a fixture of criticism right now. And it's Joe Rogan put it on himself because he brought on what he's been saying. Hey, I'm not here to agree or disagree with what he said. I'm just saying he decided to go where he went. And some people are going to say it's a rabbit hole. You can say what you want, but he knew where he was going with it, and knew there could be people going after him that were going to try to cancel him. But Joe Rogan doesn't give a shit. He keeps going, keeps doing his own show. And Neil Young went onto his website and called Spotify, quote, the home of life-threatening COVID misinformation, lies being sold for money. Now, his criticism of Rogan came after hundreds of scientists, a group, back on December 31st, asked Spotify to take down an episode of Rogan's show from December 31st. The episode featured Dr. Robert Malone promoting what was said to be, quote, several falsehoods about COVID-19 vaccines, according to the group's public letter issued on January 10th. So 2 weeks later, here we are, Neil Young decides, I'm going to do something about it. Spotify did make a statement also as well with this. He says, quote, we want all the world's music and audio content to be available to Spotify users. With that comes great responsibility in balancing both safety for listeners and freedom for creators. We have detailed content policies. We've removed over 20,000 podcast episodes related to COVID since the start of the pandemic. And listen, even before Joe Rogan came on the Spotify, there were a number of episodes that were being taken down as well. They talk about Spotify. They talk about Rogan. They go into it right now. Spotify has actually now 318 million monthly listeners around the world and 172 million that pay for subscriptions, including myself. I got to tell you this, too. I had an issue with Spotify this last couple of weeks. As soon as I bought a new phone, and when I switched over, I realized that I couldn't see the songs' titles changing on the dashboard of my car, and I have a Honda Fit. And so I'm looking on the car dashboard, and the songs won't change unless I have a phone call or a text, and then I might see the title change twice, and then it just freezes. And I just kept looking around. I looked at message boards and other places, and I didn't even think about going to YouTube to see if somebody might have put an explanation up there, and I did. Somebody did. It had 34,000 views. And the guy, about the first 10 seconds, he tells you, oh, yeah, you just got to change your permissions. What? That's it? And it worked. I changed allowing all permissions on Spotify for the app on my phone, and it automatically fixed everything. I was like, I cannot believe that was able to do that, but perfect. And I must say, as a podcaster, again, with almost 16 years experience doing this, and talking about, what platforms are really great for listening to podcasts, my personal favorite is Spotify. I tell you, Spotify right now is hands down one of the best audio platforms there is. They do such a great job. I don't even promote this that much, but I will do it right now. I have 2 playlists that I put up that I decided to go and curate myself, and I regularly change the music on both of these playlists. One is a new music playlist. I call it Mega Miami. It's kind of based on the idea of what a Miami radio station that was playing music to the younger audience would be playing now. What you would hear in the clubs, what you would hear in the in the cars, things like that. So it's a lot of Spanish music, reggaeton, Dominican dembow, some pop in there, a little bit of hip hop, and some dance, and quite a bit of dance music. EDM that would be from Europe that would have been imported over, that kind of feel. What I kind of represent as the Miami sound. And I put that together as about 6 hours of playlist, about 100 songs in there. Take a look at that for yourself. Feel free to go ahead and subscribe to it. I have it open as a public playlist. The other one I have out there is the soundtrack of South Florida, which is really a time capsule of all the music out there that I listened to growing up, and I was saying, man, this is everything I listened to almost from like the Miami Vice time to when I was about, teenager going to the clubs to current day. And there's reggaeton in there, there's pop, dance, reggae, everything's in there. It's like everything in the kitchen sink. And I really dug deep the records I used to listen to growing up as a kid, in my teens and 20s, 30s, 40s. And I figured out, let me go and find all those songs. And I went digging, and I picked up, there's about 850 songs on there and about 40 hours of music. Take a listen to that for yourself. The soundtrack of South Florida and Mega Miami, which you can find right there. And, I might go ahead and put those playlists over on the website, broadcasterspodcast.com. I'll take a look and see if I can do that and kind of embed those two. That'd be kind of nice to do as well. So I'll figure that out. So back to Neil Young and Joe Rogan. Now, although virtually all of Young's music is removed from Spotify, there are a handful of live recordings of the miscellaneous tracks that remain. But if you want to still listen to Neil Young, he does have his music on Apple Music, Amazon, and YouTube. Also, Neil Young has a subscription service to his own website, Neil Young Archives, which lets people listen to his entire catalog for $20 a year. And SiriusXM announced, hey, take advantage of the buzz. Neil Young Radio will be coming back, a curated station that introduced last month. It'll run as a satellite station for a week and for a month on the company's SXM app. Now, with that said, I mentioned that Joe Rogan and Neil Young and the story about this got brought up by Howard Stern. And, with what Howard Stern said about this, I'll say it's not too bad. I think he's, I think what he said was reasonable. Put it like that. So this is what he says. And by the way, I got to say this too. Howard Stern probably has one of the best microphones in radio. Sounds amazing. I don't know which one he uses. I never really asked about which one he uses, but as we're at it, I'm going to go and find out real quick. But I must say that's one thing that's done on that show is that he does have an incredible microphone. The one he uses is the Neumann TLM 103, which is one that's usually a really good one for music. It's a fantastic microphone. But that sucker is expensive as hell. Neumanns are wonderful. If you wanted to get one for yourself right now, you could buy it for $1,200 or $1,100 on Sweetwater. $1,200 on B&H. Woo, that is pricey. $1,100 microphone, but it is really worth it. It's fantastic. Aside from the EV7s or the SM7s, excuse me, or the EV. What are the ones that always get the? Oh yes, the RE20 Electro Voice. That's the one I'm looking for. Which is also fantastic too. That's all I can microphones. I could go on with microphones. But I'm going to move off of that. So here is what Howard Stern said about this whole story. Quote, I don't listen to Joe Rogan. I know Joe from 100 years ago. We're no longer friendly. We were friendly at one point. I just knew him as the funny guy, as a comedian. I knew him before he was on Fear Factor, actually. I know his podcast is very popular, they say. I know. He's taking his shot right there. He continued to say that even though him and Rogan are no longer pals, he respects Rogan's ability to build an audience. I am for any performer who can get any money and get paid. quote, I'm happy for any young man or woman who can get paid in show business because so many people do not get paid. So those that can, God bless, it ain't easy. It's not an easy road, and attracting an audience is not easy. It's also not that easy to go ahead and abandon an audience and, isolate yourself from the audience. No longer get engaged with your audience and basically just turn on them, which is what he did. He attracted a great audience. And now that audience isn't there for him anymore. They feel, they feel betrayed in some cases, I would imagine. Now, as we know, Howard Stern also is best known for being fined various times from the FCC from between 1990 and 2004. And he talked about his detest for censorship. Quote, I'm against any kind of censorship. I really am. I don't like censorship. I don't want to see Joe Rogan canceled, he says. I don't want to see Neil Young canceled. Everything in this world comes down to money. And all he said right there is fine. But he decided to go ahead and make his comments about it. Also made some comments about Neil Young and, knowing him so well. And every chance any story like this comes across, we get the criticism. We get the calls for canceling, right? And then also calls for censorship. So if we're against any kind of censorship, it's the thought about like everybody going after everybody and just attacking. There's a divisiveness. You want to not say there's any divisiveness when it comes to media? There absolutely is. It is tougher to go ahead and be creative without being, stepping on anybody's toes. Because there's so many more toes to step on. More than ever. There's much more sensitivity going on. And that's because of the generations growing up now that have been told, oh, well, you shouldn't tolerate what's going on right now. It's like, no, be less tolerant per generation. And more sensitive, more overprotected, more sensitive than ever. And the fact that the big corporations have now allowed themselves, when there's any public ridicule or any kind of callback or any kind of protest, then companies are easy to cave in. And I must admit, Spotify, to hold on to their horses, and Daniel Ek just not giving a shit. Spotify is going to stick behind its platform, because the other thing that was being said, and I think they said something about how, there was a point where they tried to talk about getting Joe Rogan off, and then the whole conversation was, well, if we're going to take Joe Rogan off, we got to get all these hip hop artists that are all giving explicit lyrics and talking about murder and, sexual assault and things like that. We're going to have to take them down too. Who's all in favor of that? And they're not. So then there's that whole part where some people are going to be hypocritical about it. And yeah, if you decide to do that, that's what's going to go on with that. I want to stay on the radio now, because a number of the stories I want to get into coming up here on the program. The last 20 minutes of the program is old music killing new music. That's a part I wanted to get to as well. Let's get into that real quick. There was a particular story that came out, and I know there was a study I talked about last week on the program. Well, commentary was made about it. We need to go and bring that up. And Fred Jacobs, who does a lot of consulting for radio, also brought the story up as well. And then there's a story from Variety.com that came out last week. I think it was very interesting when it comes to those broadcasters converting to podcasting. We'll take that story in a minute. Well, and also defining real radio in 2022. As a bunch of other stories I might have, I'll see if I can get through all of them, but let's try to go ahead and get through as much as we can. TheAtlantic.com put a story out, and I didn't get a chance to read this at the time of last week's show, but based on the information that came out about the U.S. music market, Ted Gioia puts a story out, which originally was on Substack, but then also got picked up by The Atlantic. Old songs now represent 70% of the U.S. music market. Even worse, the new music market is actually shrinking. So I want to just take in the story here. And by the way, Ted Gioia writes a music and pop culture newsletter, The Honest Broker, on Substack, and has written 11 books, including most recently a music of subversive history. So we talked about MRC data, which is the people that really supply Billboard with all their data. That made the stat about 70% of the U.S. market is represented by older songs. The 200 most popular new tracks now regularly account for less than 5% of total streams, twice as high as just 3 years ago. In the story, he says, never before in the history of new tracks attained hit status while generating so little cultural impact. In fact, the audience seems to be embracing the hits of the past decades instead. You know why? Because it's radio that's doing that. Because if you want to listen to it where it's publicly heard, because most of your streaming, right, Spotify, Apple, and all the others, you're listening to it one-on-one, maybe around some groups. But we're talking about if you're listening on a large-scale stage, some of these artists that are putting out new music, they're not going on major tours. They can't even pull arena shows. Meanwhile, artists of the day, they're all doing arena shows. They're all pulling stadium shows and getting lots of people at their shows. And that's the difference. There's only so many stars that are able to go ahead and have that mass appeal to tour. Now, he says, every week I hear from hundreds of publicists, record labels, band managers, and other professionals who want to hype the newest new thing. Their livelihoods depend on it. The entire business model of the music industry is built on promoting new songs. But remember, we talked about how all these record labels decided to get rid of their radio promotions and only focus on streaming because they're only working on not necessarily doing the marketing promotion to get their artists out to perform on different shows or to go out on stage and perform, promotional events or things like that. They're just not going out there and being, put out there for live performance. As a music writer, I'm expected to do the same. As our radio stations, retailers, DJs, nightclub owners, editors, playlist curators, and everyone else with skin in the game, yet all the evidence indicates that fewer are paying attention. He talks about how the Grammy Awards have been postponed indefinitely. And, yeah, I don't care about the Grammys, and I don't think anybody else does. And he says he follows thousands of music professionals on social media, didn't encounter a single expression of annoyance or regret that the biggest annual event in new music has been put on hold. He says there are a few series of events that are conspiring to marginalize new music. And here's some of the other trends he talked about. The leading area of investment in the music business is old songs. Investment firms are getting into bidding wars to buy publishing catalogs from aging rock and pop stars. The song catalogs in most demand are by musicians who are in their 70s or 80s. So it's like, picking them before they pass away. Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Bruce Springsteen, or those that have already passed on, which is David Bowie and James Brown, for examples. Even though the record labels majorly are getting in the rush to old music, buying up publishing catalogs and investing huge sums in old tunes. And then you also have to remember that there's those record labels and those publishers that are saying, oh, you want to go and reuse this music? Yeah, we'll let you in on that. Just give us a take of it. We can let you interpolate. We can let you use the music if you like, things like that. Now, they also talk about record stores being caught up in a time warp. I don't even know. There's really not many record stores left. There's not much of that. And yeah, vinyl does get sold, but really not even close to what it was. Radio stations are contributing to the stagnation, putting fewer new songs in the rotation, or judging by the offerings of my satellite radio lineup, he says, completely ignoring new music in favor of old hits. Yeah, because the older audience is what they care about, because they have left for digital. This is where digital disruption comes into play. So, who's listening to new music? Yeah, not so much over here. Because I can tell you that most of the music I listen to that's new, it's not getting played here in the States. It is in other countries. This is an American problem. Let me just make that point, too. Now, the other thing they talk about is that when a new song overcomes obstacles and becomes a hit, there's a risk of copyright lawsuits greater than ever before. The Blurred Lines lawsuit is the best example. When Olivia Rodrigo had to deal with Taylor Swift and the issues about her music being interpolated, so she had to go and give part of her rights to some of her songs, right? Same thing to Paramore and Hayley Williams, remember? And as record labels lose interest in new music, he says, emerging performers desperately search for other ways to get exposure, hoping to place their self-produced tracks on a curated streaming playlist or license their songs for use in advertising or the closing credits of a TV show. It might generate some royalty income, but do little to build name recognition. Like, remember, one of the songs that's still a top 10 song right now in the U.S. is Glass Animals by Heat Waves by Glass Animals. which is a song for 2019, and I forget which Netflix show it was really brought on by. That's the other part you got to think about. He says in here the music industry has lost its ability to discover and nurture their talents. And there's plenty of excuses for their inability to discover new and adequately promote great new artists. Copyright lawsuits have made many in the industry deathly afraid of listening to unsolicited demo recordings. If you hear a demo, you might get sued for stealing its melody or just its rhythmic groove 5 years from now. And the people whose livelihood depends on discovering new musical talent face legal risks if they take their job seriously. There's a lot of claims for it right here as to why it's going on. He also talks about how nothing is less interesting to music creators than a completely radical new kind of music, who can blame the film this way. The radio stations will only play songs that fit the dominant formulas, which have not changed much in decades. Algorithms curating so much of our new music are even worse. They are designed to be feedback loops, ensuring that the new songs are virtually identical to your favorite old songs. And anything genuinely breaks the mold is excluded from consideration almost as a rule. That's how the current system has been designed to work. A state of affairs is not inevitable, he says. A lot of musicians around the world, especially in LA and London, are conducting a bold dialogue between jazz and other contemporary styles. They're even bringing jazz back as dance music. But the songs they release sound dangerously different from older jazz and excluded from many radio stations for the same reason. The boldness for which they embrace the future becomes the reason they get rejected by gatekeepers. So he ultimately says the problem isn't a lack of good new music, which I agree with. It's an institutional failure to discover and nurture it. And it's not like this in other countries, but it's so bad here. I don't know why. And this is the corporate mindset, which he explains here. And I appreciate Ted Julia for making this point, which is where I always talk about the corporate end of the business and how they do their things. Here's what he says. I learned the danger of excessive caution long ago. This right here is the epitome of what the Broadcasters Podcast is about. Or when I first called this show Creative Not Corporate, because it really is. The corporate influence. The mainstream issues. The mainstream establishment. And how they are stuck in their ways. And why the digital disruption is so disruptive. At such a rapid pace. Here's what he says. Quote, I learned the danger of excessive caution long ago when I consulted for huge Fortune 500 companies. The single biggest problem I encountered, shared by virtually every large company I analyzed, was investing too much of their time and money into defending old ways of doing business rather than building new ones. Senior manager hated hearing this and always insisted that defending the old business units was their safest bet. And then he encountered this embedded mindset again and again and saw its consequences. Concluding that the safest path is usually the most dangerous. If you pursue a strategy, whether in business or your personal life, that all avoids all risk, you might flourish in the short run, but you flounder over the long term. And that's what's happening now in the new music business. There's a lot more to say about this, but he's absolutely correct. So I appreciate what he says in that story. He's not wrong. So take a look at that, broadcasterspodcast.com. I have that right there for you. I'll take a quick blurb here from Fred Jacobs, who also commented on the story and made this point. On the radio end, he talks about this. There were some exceptions that were being taken to the analysis, pointing to everything from misreading the charts, how new music is categorized, to overemphasizing falling Grammy Award ratings. And then Fred Jacobs mentions about the bizarre collaboration between the music industry and radio broadcasters to essentially do very little to expose the world to new music with the effort and force of past decades. He talks about that the two industries have been locked up on a holy war over royalties and compensation to a point where they have each devalued the other's contributors. He points out the labels have done very little to discover what's next. Correct. And radio, that was once a true reflection of music and talk tastes that appealed to people from 12-year-olds and 12-year-olds to deaf, is now playing it safe for decades, choosing to play the 25-54 game, the sweet spot where most agency ad buys are centered. AM and FM were once the bastions of new music discovery. progressive rock stations. Look at the book FM by Richard Neer. It tells you everything. Or actually, there's a great documentary about the Z100s coming out that I can't wait to go and watch that also kind of gives that same idea. In many cases, record companies and concert promoters supported efforts with ad buys, promotions, interviews, and appearances, but they don't do that anymore. And I mentioned that point many times on this program. Fred is not wrong. The fruits of radio's efforts to narrow the focus, or more to the point, is stagnation. It's produced an odd effect where no single source of music exposure can truly carry the weight. And when you look at iHeartRadio, they'll take a couple of new artists or music that will be coming from certain artists because they have a particular, there's a safety factor to them, a reliability factor, and they'll basically go after certain stars that will get the traction, and that's why you see who's on the charts all the time at the top. Best example, Adele's number one right now with Easy on Me. Safe record, multiple formats will play that song. Yeah, and it's going to stay up there for a while. It's going to continue to stay number one. It's a good song, don't get me wrong, but, is that the new songs we want to hear? There's other great new music out there that's not getting played, as we said. Broadcast radio has many great qualities and discernible assets. Unfortunately, playing and exposing new music is rapidly becoming a non-factor in the platform's appeal. They've abdicated that role and have seemingly little desire to win it back. So there's a great concert series going on in Vegas coming up called the When We Were Young Fest. All 90s rock acts. And one particular DJ in St. Cloud, Minnesota, Abby Minke, wrote on Twitter and said that while there's no denying the popularity of the When We Were Young Fest, it begs the question, where is the terrestrial radio format that plays the music? The demand is obviously there, and a demo willing to dish out cash, something to think about. So, just so you don't know, the When We Were Young Fest, I want to make sure to bring that point across. If you do not know what that is, it's a big concert going on very soon. It'll be held October 22nd, 23rd, and 29th, 2022. It'll be held at the Las Vegas Festival grounds. And there's a number of artists going to be there. My Chemical Romance, Paramore, Day to Remember, Avril Lavigne, Bright Eyes, Jimmy Eat World, among many others that are on there. So just to bring that up. Now, some people actually thought it was a scam. So they went after Live Nation thinking that was what's going on. So one other thing that Fred Jacobs makes the point of, it says, today, there's a means of discovering new music is splintered into hundreds of media points. A long tail of outlets where one can hear any variation of new music, and none of these has an audience mass enough to truly shape tastes like radio did. There you go. Whole lot more to be said in that article, but I'm going to just leave it right there. Take a read for it. There's so much being said right now. There's a whole lot to be said. There is, Fred Jacobs really went along with this story. He's absolutely right about it. He does end up saying that just like the next big thing in music, the next big thing in radio won't sound like a radio station we've already heard. That's okay. We're all tired of hearing the same old thing, he says. Okay, I'm not going to have time for some of the other stories I have here, which I will hold off until next week. But one story I have to go and finish up the next few minutes I have left on the show is the conversion of broadcasters going to podcast, which I think there's a number of things that can be said in this variety story. This was the first story I was going to read about this week when I got done because I saw this story pop up the next day after I recorded this show. And so here's what we got. The story is called Broadcast to Podcast. They flip off radio careers. Former on-air hosts weather the complicated pivot. Shirley Halpern writes the story. They go into the stories about some of the alternative rock stations that are out there. And in the story, they talk about Odyssey, formerly Entercom, which is a big radio company that bought the former CBS radio chain. And some of the revamping of some of their programming because they're basically just, winding down and micromanaging all their formats and all their stations. And really doing a lot of cross-the-board syndication of various DJs being hosting on nationalizing their formats for the most part, which we've talked about here before on the program as well. And one of the people they talk about is Mike Kaplan, Senior VP of Programming at Odyssey. And that he's been held up as a personification of radio's decline as the medium's reach narrows and its corporate overlords tighten belts by thumbing their noses at high price on air talent. So then they go to some of the names that have moved over to podcasting. One is Opie of Opie Anthony fame. It's really, at some time might have been somewhat of a competitor to Howard Stern on WNEW, among other stations. You also know several graduates of KRQ's Kevin and Bean show have also moved to a podcast format on Patreon. You have radio legend Steve Dahl, who continued a daily podcast after parting ways with Cumulus and WLS in 2018. And the most successful example is the Adam Carolla Show, which consistently lands among the top-ranking podcasts on multiple charts, since going strong daily since 2009, where Adam Carolla was on radio beforehand as well, decided to dip into broadcasting, was the first successful podcaster to really make money off the format, before anybody really felt like there was anything. Now, I talked about a story last week about podcasting as a producer new hit in years, and the discovery is down in the medium. The most popular programs remain perennials like Joe Rogan, WT with Mark Maron, and Adam Carolla. They're all more than a decade old. They're practically geriatric by podcast standards. Well, that's how talk radio was. You have shows from older hosts that have been around for a long time. That's just how it works. So radio veterans, they say, has an advantage, Shirley says. In an age of too many podcasts, which are nearly 3 million currently being housed on Spotify alone, and few really resonating, these personalities are well positioned to pivot to podcasting as a business, even make a go of self-employment. Radio stars, particularly from major markets where they commanded hundreds of thousands of listeners, have a built-in loyal fan base ready and willing to plop down a monthly subscription fee to continue the relationship they once had for free over the radio, which is what celebrities are doing the same thing. Now, they talk about this as something that celebrities don't possess and new podcasters don't possess. An audience that already has an audio bond with the people whose voices they've heard for years on a daily basis. I think they brought up Tom Likas in here, who's doing that as well. Completely abandoned radio. Has been in podcasting ever since. They go through a number of different names on here that have been doing shows. I don't want to go through all that. I just want to get into the bulk of what they're talking about here in terms of what's being done. Oh, okay, here we go. Tom Likas spent much of his career doling out life advice on offering brash, unfiltered talk and syndication. Worked at WABC, KFI, KLSX. He also worked in WINS or WINZ in Miami, among other places. He warns that not everything translates from terrestrial to pod. He says, quote, if they think doing the morning show zoo will work, honking the horn and saying, fuck, 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 hi, I'm on your horny man, look at me, I'm talking dirty, it doesn't, he says. Quote, you have to adjust to the medium, where the show starts when you press play. Not being live does require certain changes, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily giving something up. So Likas and Carolla, they both were let go from KLSX, which is a CBS owned station, in 2009, when the station flipped to top 40. Now, Likas had a plan to make his show successful when he did it. He said, quote, I knew there was going to be a collapse of the business, so I made preparations, like saving every email I received from listeners for 2 years straight. He says that when they gave me notice, their technique was just to fire you, give no notice to the audience or to you until you got to the station. I harvested all those addresses and started putting out a newsletter letting them know why I wasn't on the air. A year before his CBS non-compete expired, he featured a countdown clock on his website and social media accounts, and his first show had 400,000 listeners tuning in. Shifting from live internet radio, he retooled the show for podcasts, and he says, quote, when you're on for 3 or 4 hours a day, there's a lot of ad-libbing and spontaneous stuff. The podcast is not as spontaneous, and now I do something I didn't have to do for radio, write every day. He currently offers his archive of 5,000 plus episodes with new daily content at $11 a month as part of a premium package. Quote, it worked out well because I make a mint 6-figure salary. I record them from my ranch in Santa Barbara County without even leaving the property. Throughout the pandemic, I was doing 3 episodes a week without fail. To many people, Too many people have the kind of egos that need 10 million listeners or whatever. I'm happy to have 2,000 solvent, bill-paying customers who pay to hear my show, and I don't have to talk into a microphone at a radio station where they cut the Lysol budget back in 1988. But a lot of these radio guys, they think they're going to be on the air forever and not prepared for the future. I respect Tom Leykis because he made it into the business, he understood it, he got in here, and he's been successful for over a decade doing this format. Because radio people can do this format if you're paying attention. You just can't just jump right in. And which is where also the radio companies also made a mistake of, we could just, take our morning show and we could just repurpose it on podcast. And I heard that, and it was horrible. And I tried to listen to some of those shows. Just couldn't. And then they go through some of the other things when it comes to one of the shows they were featuring here in this article, the Kane and Corey podcast. Average listening time of their show is 30 minutes, compared to the 7 minutes of time spent listening on the radio. Gender breakdown for this particular show, 56% male, 44% female, mostly based out of New York, New Jersey, and Florida. And the show's breakdown, 23% are 23 to 27, 40% are 28 to 34, 25% are 35 to 44. And it's amazing. When I look at my format of my shows, it's amazing where I have a younger audience also checking out the show as well. It's always great. They go through a lot of different people that they talked to in this article. Shirley Halpern did a great job of putting this article together. But go ahead and take a look at it for yourself. I want to just take one more thing they talk in here. He says, Tom Leykis also views the intertwining with much more skepticism. When iHeartMedia says, quote, we're the biggest podcast aggregator, or we have the most podcasts, what does that even mean? Any dope with a laptop in a garage can do a podcast and even get on iHeartRadio. It makes no sense at all. But there's another thing going on. Radio is embarrassed about the word radio. Right here in Los Angeles, KNX 1070 radio is now on FM's KNX News. There's not even a mention of 1070, which is where it's been on the dial since 1924. And in more recent years, podcasts have increasingly looked like the beginnings of radio for scripted content, adopting a 21st century radio play model for a series involving actors and sound effects. Now, one person that was interviewed for this article, they mentioned about the podcasts of tomorrow, that they will sound and look completely different than everything we've experienced at this point, because most of the technology around podcasting is not great yet. What are you talking about? The microphones sound good. The recordings can sound good. It's easy to sound like radio and to convert into podcasting. For those that are not doing the right thing and buying proper equipment, I can't talk to you about that. I mean, when I started this 10 years ago almost, I said to myself, well, I'm going to get a decent microphone to do this show on. And I've continued to upgrade my microphone ever since. Now I'm on the Shure MV7 USB. It's fantastic. It sounds great. And I really love the way I sound on this microphone. And this is the level I'm going to be with. I'm not going to get the Neumann 137 like Howard Stern does. I wish I could, but, I'm fine with this right here. And right now, there's a thought that this is peak podcast 1.0, which is to say how many more agents and managers are going to tell their clients that the next Joe Rogan should do a podcast. But we're still not at peak dollars being spent. Not even anywhere near that, which he's absolutely right. And down the line, we're going to see how much more money is being put into podcasting and how it's going to work out. That's the show. I have more stuff to talk about that I just going to have to hold over to next week. Defining Real Radio in 2022. Is the media doomed? I'm going to talk about that too. When it comes to corporate media, we'll have that story for next week. 2 living backgrounds for NFTs. I'll bring that story up. One story I wanted to bring up real quick is the USFL is going to be coming up in April. And the opening game will be aired for the first time since 1967. The Super Bowl, if you didn't know, aired on all 3 major networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. Well, the USFL opener is going to air on Fox and NBC simultaneously for their first game, which is incredible. A great way to start that football league once again returning after so many years. So there we go. Thanks for listening in, finding the show as you always do. I really appreciate it. Come back next week for another Broadcasters Podcast. And remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.